Today, we will cover all of the standard year-end close procedures for Microsoft Dynamics GP. So our presenter today to start off is going to be Ron Peterson, our manufacturing practice manager. And before I hand things over to Ron, here's a quick agenda for today on what Ron will cover. He's going to go through the install and upgrade process, and then we'll cover the manufacturing and field service suite, along with what we call the distribution suite, which is sales order processing, purchase order processing, and inventory control.
Okay, so as Eric mentioned, Ron Peterson, I'm just going to be going over a few things, sort of the system upgrade itself, and then some of the processes for the modules, sales orders, purchase orders, inventory. So to kick it off, as far as the upgrade goes, if you're doing your own upgrade, just a couple of things to remember and things to go over. All updates from Microsoft are cumulative, and that means that as long as you're downloading the most recent update, it will contain all of the prior updates, all the service packs, the hot fixes, and everything that goes along with that. The upgrade must happen on all of the clients that are running GP. Otherwise, you're going to get version errors when the client launches the product. Okay, so a couple of things before the actual update starts. There's a few things to keep in mind. It's always a good idea to back up the databases. Make sure you back up not only the company database, but also the Dynamics database. So that means doing a SQL backup over those two things. And then you should also back up the reports and the forms dictionaries, and you do that by a couple of different steps. First, you can export out the modified forms and reports that you have by going into GP Tools, Customize, and Customization Maintenance, and from there you can export the modified reports and forms into package files. From there, once that's done, you can back up the actual forms and reports dictionaries simply by copying them next to the current ones and renaming the extension. You usually put a date in or something to keep track of where they are. And if you're the least bit uncomfortable with it, it's always a good idea, though it's a little bit more work, to set up a test environment on a separate server to run the entire upgrade. And that will allow you to see if there's going to be any problems at all, which can be addressed offline and doesn't cause you any consternation during the upgrade, the actual upgrade process. Okay, so as far as doing the upgrade, make sure that the person or the user that's logged in doing the upgrade has local admin rights. And when you do the upgrade, there's a couple of steps. There's the actual update of the executable or the application, which just means running the install and launching it, which will update the dictionaries, the actual GP product. From there, once the product is upgraded, you can log in, and it will tell you to log into Dynamics GP Utilities, Dynutils, and then upgrade the companies. Now, we usually do this upgrade on the SQL Server client install for the sake of efficiencies. Okay, so a couple other things to keep in mind. So once you've decided to start the upgrade, you should make sure that you have all of your ISV upgrades as well. because those will need to happen at the same time. So if the upgrade should go just fine, but if it doesn't, there's sort of a wealth of information that you can access to determine what went wrong and how to fix it. There are some links that are going to be in this PowerPoint that you can refer to, some knowledge base articles that can help you determine what the problem is. All right, so the other thing is you can also enable the DEC SQL log prior to the upgrade, and on how to do that. There's a knowledge base article on how to do that with the link. That will give you some extra information if anything does go awry. So if it does, in the unlikely event that it does, don't restore the database and start over, because the vast majority of the things can be solved from that point on. So there will be indications and notifications of what went wrong, and there are hot topics here that are linked that can give you an idea of how to fix it. So you can fix it while the upgrade is, after the upgrade has failed, fix it, and then you can then resume the upgrade. Okay, so once it has upgraded the databases, then it's time to upgrade the forms and reports dictionaries, and that's in an additional tasks section in Dyne Utils, in Dynamics GP Utilities. If they are shared, which is always a good idea, if everybody's forms and reports dictionaries are pointed to a common location on the network, then you only need to do that one time. And also remember that the install files, the MSBs, can be pushed out to the client workstations automatically using the automatic client update group policy or some other mass deployment tools that your IS team uses. Makes it much easier. All right, so once it's completed successfully, then it's a good idea to back up the Dynamics database as well as all the company databases. And then the forms and reports have also been upgraded, so it's a good idea to make a copy of those, export them out to package files as well, and label them accordingly in case you need to refer back to them. All right, so once the upgrade is done, then there's the closing process. So we'll talk about some of the different modules. So manufacturing field service, there isn't really anything that you need to do for year-end close, but we do recommend that for reporting purposes, you process any and all labor and inventory transactions associated with manufacturing that you can. And then it's always a good idea, if you are running a standard cost valuation to your inventory, to do a roll-up and revalue to get fresh costs. All right, so sales order processing. So again, there are no required procedures. However, there's some things that we do recommend. Again, it's always a good idea to process and post anything that you are able to. And this is important to ensure that the historical amounts are accurate for the closing year for the upcoming month. So also reconcile the sales documents, and that'll just rip through the sales order documents and verify that the subtotals and the quantities are correct, as well as verifying the serial and lot quantities of the documents. Also removing the sales documents, that will clean up the open file, the open table, and move all the quotes, orders, and back orders into history if they don't contain a deposit, and all of the line items have a remaining quantity of 0. All right, so in purchasing, similar, nothing is required here, but the sort of similar recommended steps. Post anything that you can to ensure accurate year-to-date for the upcoming month, and then reconciling purchase orders. And it will, again, rip through the purchase order table and adjust, if necessary, the quantities, subtotal status, costs, and discounts, or let you know if there are any problems with any of the documents. You can also remove the completed purchase orders, and it will remove closed or canceled documents, ones that have been completed. Move them from the active or open purchase order work table and move it into history. And then you can print any additional reports and archive them, like the purchase order analysis or the received not invoice. Okay, so moving on to inventory. So when should you do the inventory? Well, at the end of the fiscal year, importantly, before any new transactions that you would do that would affect the inventory quantities, before any of them are posted. We have a narrow window there. So what does the inventory year-end and close process do? Well, it transfers all summarized current year quantity, cost, and the sales amounts to the last year for all of your items which you have been keeping sales history. So it will also update each item's beginning quantity, and that will use the quantity on hand for each site that the inventory exists in. We'll also zero out the quantity sold field in the item quantity for fresh reporting purposes. And it will also give you the option to remove any items that you've marked as discontinued. It will remove sold receipts or remove any sold lot attributes and update the item standard cost. If you're not running manufacturing, but using standard cost. Okay, so what are the steps to do the inventory close? Well, so enter and post all of your purchase orders and sales orders and inventory transactions for the current year. Reconcile purchase orders and sales orders before. It's always a good idea to complete a physical inventory, so we have accurate quantities for the beginning of the year, and of course post those adjustments, and then print any reports for archiving, stock status versus receipts, anything that you're required to, and then you can close the year. Okay, so just some key points for inventory control. So again, it's always a good idea to make a backup. If you are using sales orders and purchasing, you need to reconcile sales orders and purchasing before you reconcile inventory. Inventory reconcile process actually goes out to sales orders and purchase orders, and it uses that information for its calculations. So as long as those are correct, your inventory calculations will be correct. So as a side note, it's an opportune time to implement the historical inventory trial balance, the HITB, so you have a fresh line in the sand of inventory and transactions. And again, if you're using manufacturing, then it's always a good time at the beginning of the year to roll up and revalue your inventory. Okay, so for your reading pleasure, there are a number of documents that you can read up on that's go into a little bit more detail on the topics that I've covered today. The process for closing, reconcile procedures, what if you've closed twice, how can you recover from that, and what if your inventory doesn't remove discontinued items. Well, that's all I have for my part. We'll turn it over to Sarah at this point.
All right, good morning, everybody. This is Sarah Britton with OTT, Microsoft Dynamics GP and NetSuite Consultants, and I will be finishing presenting the rest of the webinar today. So we'll move right into payroll. So as far as payroll year-end closing, when should the payroll year-end close be done? You should make sure that you complete all of your 2018 pay runs. So that should be all completed before you even start thinking about running your year-end process. You should also make a backup. We suggest that you make a backup and you title it 2018 pre-year-end wage file, and you keep that backup handy. And then you should also do that year-end backup before you begin processing pay runs in the new year. The payroll year-end close, what that does is it basically creates the year-end wage file, and that wage file contains the annual wage information used to generate your W-2s, your 1095s, and the magnetic media that you use to report to the government. Just a special reminder here, if you are on a release of Microsoft Dynamics GP 2016 R2 or later, you can now print your W-2s onto plain paper, so that eliminates the need to purchase the forms from an office supply store, from the government. You have the ability to print your W-2s directly onto plain paper. On April 10th of this year, support did end for GP 2013. So there is no year-end update, and there will be no tax updates released for them, or if you're on that version of GP 2013. If you haven't upgraded already and you need that year-end release or the tax tables, you should plan your upgrade today and get in contact with us. So to close the year, you want to verify first that your version of GP is compatible with the year-end update that was released, as well as receiving the new tax updates. So you should either be on GP 2015, 2016, or 2018. The next step is to complete all of your 2018 pay runs, and then you can complete all your regular monthly and quarterly period end procedures, whatever you run on a regular basis. And again, here we are again with the pre-year-end backup. You should create that pre-year-end backup that says pre-year-end 2018 wage file. Install the year-end update if that's something that's necessary. Once we get done with the slideshow here, I'll bring up a document that shows you all of the changes, regulatory changes, as well as fixes and performance upgrades that were included in the year-end release this year. And then the next step is to create the year-end wage file. Now, keep in mind, it doesn't actually have to happen exactly in this order. You can install the year-end update before you complete all your 2018 pay runs. That is not an issue. Next step would be to, after you run that year-end, is to make a post-year-end backup. So we recommend that you keep the pre-year-end backup as well as the post-year-end backup. You keep that handy in case there's ever any need to go back on those backups. You want to go in and verify your W-2 and 1099-R statement information, and then you can edit your W-2s, 1095s, 1099-R. You can make those edits if necessary right from GP. Next step is to run the W-2 validation report. After that, the W-2 forms, the W-3 transmittal form, the 1095C, and the 1094C transmittal. If you are using the 1095C or the 1094C, those forms are available from GP as well. Next step is to edit your 1099-R if necessary, and then again running the validation report and your 1099-R forms, as well as your transmittal form. Step number 13 is to create the W-2 electronic file to submit to the government. That is an optional step. I think it's required. I forget what the regulations are. If you have so many employees, it is required that you do submit that W-2 electronic file electronically to the IRS. Just a little reminder here, the 1095 the 1094C transmittal, we do not, the GP does not currently have the option to electronically submit that file. So I think it's if you're considered a large employer, I think over 50, you do have to electronically submit that, that form. Next step there is just to close the fiscal periods for the payroll series. That is an optional step, it's not required. And then finally, after all of that is complete, and before you run pay runs for 2019, you will want to install the 2019 payroll tax update. Key points to remember, there is an alternate. Like I said, you know, what we just went through the steps in this slideshow, that's not the only way to do things. There is an alternate checklist if you need to process 2019 pay runs before printing your 2018 W-2. And that's, you know, pretty common. So that alternate checklist is included in our year-end booklet. The year-end wage file, that year-end wage file is held in the tables listed there. It's the UPR 10-100 and the UPR, or through the UPR 10-107 tables. It includes the year-end wage report. Make sure you edit and print your W-2s. Create your electronic file as necessary. Prior to processing pay runs in the new year, 2019, you will want to install Payroll Tax Update Round 1. In order to do that, you can do that right from the GP interface. You just go up to Microsoft Dynamics GP, Maintenance, US Payroll Updates, and check for Payroll Updates. It will ask you for your authorization number, which is typically your company phone number, and then you can install those updates directly in there. It's a pretty easy process. If you don't have internet connectivity on the computer that you're trying to install tax updates for, it's obviously not going to be able to go out and retrieve those. So there are ways to download those tax tables and install manually as well. So here's some important due dates coming up for this year. You can see most of them are pretty much standard due dates. W-2s usually always due around January 31st. The 1095 statements to your employees, the IRS did extend the date that you need to furnish these forms to your employees to March 4th, 2019. However, they did not extend the 1094C transmittal when filed on paper must still be submitted by February 28th, 2019. 1095C statements when filed electronically, you have until April 1st, 2019. When should the close be done? I'm sorry, I'm moving on to receivables here. We finished up the payroll portion of the presentation, and we will move on to receivables. Receivables, when should the year-end close be done? Both the calendar year-end and fiscal year-end close should be done at the end of the calendar year prior to posting any transactions in the next calendar year. So what does the year-end close process do? So the calendar year-end close clears the calendar year-to-date finance charges and moves them to the last year calendar field in the customer finance charge summary. Okay, so that's really all it does. It's just moving data basically from one column in a table to another column in the table. The fiscal year-end close, that transfers all the amounts other than the calendar year-to-date finance charge amount to the last year column in the customer summary. So if you go into your customer inquiry or your customer summary, you can see year-to-date sales, last year-to-date sales, so on and so forth. So basically, all this close is doing is, again, moving data from one column into the next column. So some people don't do the receivables management year-end close because they're not using those columns. Obviously, we suggest that you do, just so that all of the data appears correctly in the system. And again, you're going to want to complete that year-end close after you're done processing all transactions in 2018 and before you process any sales transactions into 2019. So what steps should I take? You want to post all receivables transactions for 2018. Make a pre-year-end closing backup. We are going to tell you multiple times throughout this webinar to create a lot of backups. Some people do all of these processes in one day, so they really only need to make one year-end closing backup. And then close the year. Next thing you want to do is close the fiscal period if your fiscal period is also aligned with the calendar year, and then close the tax year. Then we suggest making a post-year-end closing backup. Again, if you do everything all on the same day, you won't have to create a backup in between each of the steps: receivables, payables, payroll, so on and so forth. Key points to remember when we're talking about the receivables management year-end. You want to make restorable backups when recommended, what we just went through. Receivables management is not completely date sensitive. So what that means is you look at those columns in the customer summary inquiry or in the tables. It doesn't make a cutoff based on date. It makes a cutoff based on when you close the calendar year or fiscal year. So if you have a sales transaction that's dated 12/31/2018, but you did the year-end close before posting that transaction would actually fall into the current year rather than the past year when you look at that customer summary. So, like I said, as there are some date-sensitive features, the best option is to close the year on time. That concludes receivables. We'll move on to payables. Payables is actually very closely related to receivables. When I say closely related, the procedures are pretty much the same, and the processes and what it does is pretty much the same as well. So you want to make sure that you're running the calendar year-end close routine at the end of the calendar year prior to posting transactions in the new year. The fiscal year-end close routine should be run at the end of the fiscal year prior to posting transactions in the new year. So if you're doing both, if your calendar year and your fiscal year coincide with one another, you can do both the calendar and fiscal year-end close at the same time. So similar to receivables management, the payables year-end close process basically moves information from one column in a table to another column in a table. So the calendar close, that transfers the 1099 amounts from the year-to-date column to the last year column in the amounts since last close view. That's in the vendor yearly summary window. The fiscal close, that transfers all other amounts from the year-to-date column to the last year. So again, it's basically just moving information from one column to another column. Remember that the year-end close only affects the vendor yearly summary window for the amounts since last close view, which will affect other areas like your smart list year-to-date, last year and last year-to-date amounts, and also some summary reports. It will not affect the printing of your 1099s. So you do not need to close the payables management or perform the payables management year-end close to print or generate your 1099s. If these amounts are incorrect because of the year-end close was not done at the correct time, and you would like to fix them, support does have scripts that can be run to correct the vendor yearly summary window. If you don't do it at the correct time and you go and you press it twice, which we've had people do before, with both receivables management and payables management, if you close it once and then you click it and close it again, all of your last year amounts will now be zeroed out, because if you didn't have any sales in the current year, it'll move that to the last year, and that will be zero. So the system is not going to prevent you from clicking that close button twice. So what steps should I take to close the year in a little bit more detail? You want to post all payables transactions for the year. So for 2018, post all of your payables transactions. We suggest that you print the historical age trial balance report. Next step would be to install the year-end update if necessary. And I will cover this a little bit later, but if you are using GP to print your 1099s, you will need that year-end update because it does include some regulatory changes for the 1099. Next step is to verify and edit your 1099 information. Print your 1099 statements. Again, a pre-year-end backup is suggested. Closing the year, you can go in and close your fiscal periods for the purchasing module. And then finally, the post-year-end backup. Some important points to remember. I can see this slide must have been missed. Your new IRS filing date is January 31st, 2019 for the 1099 miscellaneous if reporting non-employee compensation in box 7. Payables management, like receivables management, is not fully date sensitive, so it is still recommended that you process your year-end closing routines at the actual year-end. So, you know, when you do your financial year-end close, that is date sensitive, so you can do that at a later date, but payables and receivables basically have to be done at the point where you're finished entering all transactions regarding payables and receivables for 2018. Vendors should be marked as 1099able at the time transactions are posted or paid for the 1099 information to auto-populate. So if you created a new vendor and at the time that you created that vendor, you did not mark that vendor as a 1099 vendor, and you went and you ran some processes or you ran some payables for that vendor, those payables will not show up. So it's only going to show up at the point that you go and mark that vendor as 1099. You can use the 1099 details window to edit those 1099 amounts individually. So you can take a look, you can go back on looking at the transactions that have been processed through the year, and if you did forget to mark a vendor as a 1099 vendor, you can go back and mark those transactions as a 1099 transaction so that it will be included on the 1099. Okay, so that includes year-end for the payables module. Next, we'll move on to fixed assets. Fixed assets, year-end close. When should that process be done? It should be processed after payables management is closed and before closing the general ledger. Each book can be closed separately, but all books should be closed before you do any processing in the fixed assets module for the new year. The year-end close process, basically what that does is in the asset general information window, it clears the year-to-date maintenance amount from the last maintenance date window. The quantity is copied to the begin quantity field in the expand quantity window. In the asset book window, the year-to-date depreciation amount is cleared. Your cost basis is copied to begin year cost field. Your life-to-date depreciation is copied to begin reserve field, and your salvage value is copied to begin salvage field. Also, in the book setup window, the current fiscal year is increased for each closed book. Starting in Dynamics GP 2015 and later versions, there is a fixed assets year-end report. So that's a status report of all assets affected by the close. And you must be on GP 2015 or later. Steps to take when closing the year. You want to perform, like I said, the year-end close for your payables management. You should enter all of your fixed asset transactions for the year. Depreciate all the assets through the end of the year. You want to also perform that GL posting process. So run the depreciation, post the GL entries, look at any required year-end reports that you're used to running or that you think you may need to review after the close. verify that your calendar and quarter is set up for the following year, the next year that is going to be open. So if you close 2018, you want to make sure that you have 2019 calendar and quarter set up before running the year-end close. Creating your backup, and then you're obviously going to want to close the year at that point. So that is it as far as the fixed assets go. Next step is your GL close. Year-end close, that should be done after you've completed the year-end close process for all other modules. So you want to make sure that you close all other modules before doing anything with the general ledger year-end close. The other modules should be closed in the following order, kind of how we followed with our slideshow here: inventory, receivables, payables, fixed assets. So the year-end close process, what that does is it moves all open year transactions from the GL 20,000 table, which is an open table, to the GL 30,000 table, which is a history table. It creates the balance brought forward journal entries in the GL 20,000 table. It will remove inactive GL accounts without a balance or history. You can uncheck that option in the year-end close window if you don't want to remove those inactive GL accounts. GP 2013 R2 and up, so any release GP 2013 R2 and later will also clear out unit accounts if marked. So there's an option in that year-end close process to clear out any unit accounts you may have if you mark that option. The balances for all balance sheet accounts are rolled forward to the new year. So the beginning balance in the new year for the balance sheet accounts will be the same as the ending balance from the prior year you were closing. So as you notice, you're not going to have any balances in your balance sheet accounts in 2019 until you close 2018. So just continuing here, the profit and loss accounts are rolled into retained earnings accounts if you close to one retained earnings account, or with the amount from the P&L accounts in that division if you close to divisional or multiple retained earnings accounts. All of your P&L accounts will have a zero balance at the beginning of the new year. The fiscal period tables are updated to mark the year just closed as a historical year. It automatically closes to analytical accounting, and your year-end close report will print as part of that year-end close process. You cannot reprint this report at a later time. So you want to make sure, if you want to keep that report, that you print it, save it to a file, however you want to save that report. So steps that you should take to close the year: you should complete closing procedures for all of their modules, post your final adjusting entries, account posting type reviews. So you should go through and review to make sure that you have all of your P&L accounts marked as P&L and balance sheet accounts marked as balance sheet, so that it will follow through with the proper processing for the year end. Perform your file maintenance. So it is suggested that you go and run check links prior to closing the year end close. Just check your general ledger settings. So you want to go into your general ledger setup window, and you want to make sure that you are keeping your account history. Make sure that box is checked. If that box is not checked for some reason, you will lose all of your transactions from the year before. So again, it is suggested that you go into that window and just make sure that that account transaction history box is checked. There's more detail about that window in our year-end booklet. Next thing to do is to make a backup, and then you want to print your trial balance. Print your final financial statements. Make sure the new 2019 fiscal year is created, and then go ahead and close the year. You can also close all fiscal periods for all modules. That's optional if you want to go into that fiscal period setup window and close all of the modules for the year. Next thing you want to do is print your summary trial balance and verify with the trial balance you printed before the close. adjust your budget numbers for next year, and then finally make a post year-end closed backup. Important points to remember: make a backup. We do definitely suggest making a backup prior to performing your financial year-end close. It's actually very important, just in case there are any errors, to have that backup available in case we need to restore from it. You want to have all of the users out of GP when you perform the year-end close. It is suggested that the year-end close is performed at the server for performance issues. You want to make sure that you have enough free space on the server to allow for the GL 20,000 table to double in size. The year-end close routine, it does appear to hang at 50%, but it is still processing. So don't, end task on GP in the middle of the year-end close routine. Just let it run. So these are some knowledge-based resources that are available for you in case you have any questions about the year-end closing procedures for any of those related modules. We also send out a year-end close booklet with similar information contained in it. Just so you guys know, a lot of people will do their financial year-end close so that they can see their beginning balance of their balance sheet accounts. You can, if you have the correct option selected, go back in and post any adjusting entries in the previous year. You can also reverse the year-end close process if you need to make some adjustments to that year as well, and then reclose it. So GP will handle all of the journal entries related to opening up the year again and then closing it once again. So if you do have any additional questions, you can contact us at our technical support line, 651-262-2626, or email us at support@ott-inc.com. There is also the Microsoft Dynamics GP customer source website that you can go for resources as well. So that does conclude our webinar, the slideshow. I just wanted to show you the document that I have up here for what's included in the year-end update released by Microsoft for this year. So it does have the list of changes included by version of GP. You will want to notice that there are some performance issues that have been addressed in that year-end update. For instance, the new mass navigation list, are not appearing, and there's some extremely slow performance issues when you are doing the inquiry transaction by document for the payables or receivables. One of the things that you do want to pay attention to, you can review this list, but regulatory changes down below. So there are no changes to the W-2 this year, so that is fine from last year. However, if you are making if you are doing any 1099 forms from GP, you should make sure that you install that year-end update, because there are changes to the payables forms. The 1099 DIV, the 1096, and the payroll 1099-R form. There are regulatory changes to those forms, so you will need to install that year-end update. Same thing with the ACA. So there are format changes to the ACA 1095C and to the 1094C. Okay, so that is all I have